Cool. All right. So this talk is about uh, my personal interest in a particular Unison stack. To start, my name's Tavish. I'm a software engineer at a company called Momentum. I didn't really want to share any personal details, so you get these really underwhelming ones. I'm an enthusiast in Unison and HTMX, and I just moved to Connecticut, and I live in a very old house. I don't know if you can see it behind me. Um, yeah, and no one gets more than that. I have a quick slide here just about my company, just to plug it. I work at a company that makes fundraising software, as in software for fundraisers. It sprinkles a little AI magic into it. It's great. It's a very small company. We are currently trying to hire a front-end engineer, so if you're interested, feel free to reach out. All right, so WUH is the best I could come up with as a fun acronym in the style of like the Beth stack or LAMP or stuff like that for Unison, HTMX, and web components. In particular, I'm using Shoelace web components because it's a really great open source library, but you can use whatever you want or roll your own. So this whole stack kind of came about because I wanted to write full stack Unison web apps because I like Unison and I like making web apps. I didn't want to write, I wanted to write as little JavaScript as possible. And I didn't want to have to think about a design system or do any heavy lifting in regard to that. So this talk is about, with extreme time limitations, giving the absolute minimal high-level overview of these choices, and then I'm going to take a huge risk and do some slightly choreographed live coding to build a to-do list application from scratch and deploy it to production. So the first bit is like just why Unison. We're at a Unison conference. You'll probably hear more about this, but it's generally a delight to use. It has trivial deployments as part of the language. It has trivial, though currently a little bit limited storage, but still really cool. Abilities are my favorite abstraction. I love the REPL-driven development workflow and working with Unison Codebase Manager. The doc type is really great. I like how dependency management works, etc. But an immediate problem with Unison when you're trying to do full stack development is that one of its very cool strengths is that you have code as structured data in a database instead of text, which makes it kind of hard to co-locate JavaScript meaningfully except as literal strings in a database. This is perfectly fine for very small little bits of JavaScript, but you really want to limit the amount of JavaScript you write. And this is kind of where HTMX slides in, because that whole community also wants to minimize JavaScript, though they're not doing it because they have some kind of technical constraint. They're doing it because they think JavaScript should be limited on its own, and you can make simpler, better web applications in many cases without thick JavaScript clients and just leaning more into HTML. They also have a memes section on their webpage, so I think that's a big positive. So HTMX is a small library that extends HTML, which is what the X is for, to solve the kind of most obvious problems that cause people to kind of rule out just using plain HTML for modern web pages. Most importantly, any element can make requests, and you can have any event you want trigger those requests. You can actually use all HTTP methods, so you can finally do deletes and patches instead of posts to like a /delete endpoint. And you no longer need to do full screen refreshes. It has AJAX requests, and as I'll go over shortly, you can override specific bits of the DOM or insert HTML that's returned from the server into a specific part of the page instead of forcing a full screen refresh every time. So, like I said, the bread and butter of HTMX is the ability to specify that an element will do a post or a put or a get, or whatever you like when it's clicked, and will then put the result of that request into the DOM wherever you want it to go. And you decide that stuff declaratively using attributes. So in this example here, we're using HX post to say how we want to do a post to this endpoint. We use HX swap to describe the strategy for how the result is inserted. By default, it'll target itself. So this is an interactive example that we'll see more of this in a bit. But this is essentially saying whatever is returned from clicked, replace itself with that. There's some core attributes here. The most important ones for us at the moment are HX post and HX delete to let us do a post and a delete. HX swap to say how. So we're going to be like doing an after begin to insert the response into the first child element of something. So we have a list of tasks and a to-do list. We're going to insert the result right at the top of that. And an HX target, which will let you say something like, actually, don't target myself, target some other element somewhere else on the page. And it uses CSS selectors for this. It also gives you animations and kind of lifecycle hooks. Like in this case, when you're swapping in HTML, it puts this HTMX swapping class on the targeted element, which allows you to add transitions to it, which is pretty neat. There's too much to go into here, but they have a really great book that's free on their webpage. I purchased a copy because I like having it physically near my desk. I always look over to it when I'm talking about it for some reason. It's a pretty cool coffee table book. Great. And then for Shoelace Web Components, there's just like a screenshot. It's got a whole bunch of components on the side. I just don't want to design buttons. But because we're not in the React ecosystem or one of those other popular JavaScript thick clients, we don't have all these like React component libraries like Shocker UI. So instead, Web Components gives you the ability to do this stuff, but to put it into plain HTML or React if you feel like it. So Shoelace is portable in that way. But as you can see from this example, it's literally just HTML. Yeah, so Shoelace does a whole bunch of nice stuff. This is just from their webpage. I mostly just don't want to roll my own buttons, which is the first point there. And the quick start for it is essentially you just use a CDN to get their kind of optimized autoloader for the individual components as needed. And there's style sheets for theming. So from the Unison ecosystem, the main things we're using here are this Simon's HTML library, which is an Elm-like library if you've used Elm before that just will wrap, plain string HTML to make it a little bit more typed in the ecosystem, which is very pleasant. HTMX just uses those same HTML and attribute types, but wraps the HTMX API. So you'll see like HX post will be like a function. And then the main thing would be this HTMX web app starter, which is something I made, which is just my attempt at a create React app for this stack. What we'll be doing is just kind of following this instructions, though with the small caveat that the actual app starts with a full to-do app as an example in it that you can use as a starting point. I forked this with a demo version that's exactly the same, except it just has a trivial hello world starting setup. I also want to just call out that I'm a big fan of snippets. I ended up removing most of them from the talk, but I did keep one in. I think there's a decent amount of boilerplate and repetitive code, which has the upside of being explicit and nice, and the downside of being slow to type, and you have to debug it if you do a typo. I think snippets kind of fixes that, and so you'll briefly see some snippets in here. Great, so here's the goal. We are going to try to build a to-do list app. We're going to try to deploy it to stage of production. It's going to have persistent storage, and hopefully a random passerby will assume it's a React tutorial when they're looking at the actual deployed app. All right, so we go into live coding. This is where everything goes wrong. All right, so let's go. So here is my editor. I've made it extra big, which is really jarring for me. On the left, we just have a scratch file, and I have notes that I'll be uncommenting and tweaking as we go. On the right is my terminal. I will start UCM just to show that there's no tricks here. We are in here. I'll save this file. Hello, Unison. Perfect. So I'm going to first create a new project. So I'm going to create an empty one. So just a new project in UCM without anything new in it. Let's call it Unison all tasks. We created it. I'm gonna look inside here. There's nothing in here. I'm gonna pop over, and this is the part where I'm pulling all of that starter demo code in. We pulled it in. I take a look. We've got a whole bunch of stuff here now. There's one last little bit of house cleaning here, which is that there is an app name in here. I'm going to change this to our Unison for all tasks, just because I need a different name. I will update that just to show why I need that. We have, I think I can do dependence app name. And so you can see that I have some deploy function that relies on the app name, and also there's a couple like small wrappers, like the stage app name is just stage plus that app name, so that's useful for us. The key things here that to know about when we're starting is that there is a main function right here, and it's if you're familiar with main functions, this is where all of everything is composed together. At the moment, it's just running some routes. If we look at those routes, they're very simple. There's just a hello world route that has hello slash some name, and then it just returns hello in that name. And then there's a home route, which just returns this H1 welcome message. And then just to show you what our deploy functions look like, they're very trivial. They're just the cloud API. The only important bit really here is this deploy HTTP function, which takes an environment, which we kind of instantiate above, and then gives it our main function. And we're also passing in a database instance here. But hopefully we won't have to touch this bit again. But I'm just going to go ahead and do our first deploy. All right, so it deployed it. We open it up. This is live on the internet. If you feel like manually typing this in, which I don't encourage you to do, but we're here. This is what we had in there. If we put in hello Bob, this is a real website deployed. I think that's pretty cool. Big strength of Unison is that we've deployed something to a real website available on the internet already. Great, so we've gotten started. So next step, we're talking about a to-do app. I'm going to call it a task because the word to-do is really overloaded. But so we're going to have a task type. It has an ID, it has a description. I'm unnecessarily wrapping these in extra types for a little bit more type safety instead of using plain text, but that's really up to you. I'm just going to go ahead and add that to the code base. Great. And now let's actually update those kind of like hello world routes to be something more meaningful for us, or at least kind of stub them out. Just for some help, I don't know if you're familiar with Unison watch expressions, but these just run every time you save. So I'll just save again. You see it pops up again. Just wanted to show you the kind of HTML syntax. So this would be a P element with no attributes, and then inside it has a single child element of text, render them as HTML. And you can also map it to text, which we do a bunch. So you can see on the right, the first one returns this HTML structure, and when you convert it to text, it returns kind of what you're expecting here. So it's a very thin wrapper that just renders to HTML text. Our actual routes are just going to be a get for tasks, post to tasks to create a new task, a delete task that takes an ID, and then we have a home route, which is just going to redirect to our tasks, and a not found kind of catch-all that will match on any route that wasn't caught above, and just returns a 404. So I'm going to update the task route. I'm going to deploy again. It's cool to do so many deploys during a live talk. Great, so it's changed again. Render is HTML. We can see that we've redirected here. If I just approve it again, I just went to the homepage again and redirected the tasks. Great. So a little bit further along, I'm going to clear this out. Oops. Live coding. Great. So now this is a little bit where HTMX and the web components come in. So I'm going to make some UI elements. There's a lot to talk about here. We don't have to go super far into it. There is a little bit of CSS that's already here that came with the app, which is mostly just around a couple small things like not doing page flashes when you're loading the web components, which is like this bit here, and then just some simple like margin and sizing stuff along with like the to-do animations. Very straightforward. That was done a little bit ahead of time, but there's very little CSS in here because we really want to rely on the design system web components. Cool. So we have three things here. We have a tasks page. These are all just functions, by the way, but this takes a list of that task type that we made, and it'll return HTML. So it's just going to loop over each of the tasks and create a task detail, which we'll look at in a second. And then it just returns a page, which has a main element, and inside it we have our header, we have a form, and then we have this div with the ID of to-dos, which has all the tasks in it. Our task form is where we get into a little bit of our HTMX. So this is a form that's going to do a post to our tasks endpoint. It's going to target our, so it uses CSS selectors. So it's going to target whatever element on our page has an ID of to-dos, which we did right up here. So whatever the result of this post is, it's going to be trying to place it inside or around this to-dos based on how we define swap. And we define swap as being after begin, which means first put it in as the first child element. So the expectation is we create a to-do, we get it back, we insert it in the DOM as the first child element of this div up here. We also say that we want the swap to be artificially slow. This will give time for a cool fade-in effect. We also have this data loading states. This is an HTMX extension that just gives us, makes it kind of easy and declarative to be able to do this down here, which is the submit button. While the request is in flight, it'll be disabled. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. There's a shoelace input here and a shoelace button, just so that we get it looking nice without needing to design it again. And this is a shoelace variant of primary. The other component we have here is a task detail, takes a task, and then it returns a shoelace card with a class of to-do card, which has a tiny bit of styling in the CSS, mostly around sizing and margins. Got data loading states again, and then inside here, it's the description being displayed. And then we have another shoelace button. This time it's a delete button, goes to the delete route. The target this time is looking for the closest element with a class of to-do card, which is going to be itself up here. And in this case, we're going to replace the outer HTML, which just means the whole thing, and we're going to do it over the course of a second. Similarly, it disables when it's running, and we're using the shoelace danger variant of it. Great, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to add these. Now I want to show off a snippet. Just because there was a lot of boilerplate in this, I've just been uncommenting code. I just want to show you that something like a snippet library could make this stuff really easy to bootstrap for yourself, like any kind of repeated things. So all I did was use my CRUD ability and add task, and now I have my ability defined with upsert, get, delete, get all. So given a task, it'll upsert it presumably. I have to implement it. You can fetch by ID, you can delete by ID, you can get all of them. If you're not familiar with abilities, they're great. There's a lot to talk about there. In this case, you can think about it as kind of like an interface for a service. There's lots of other things it can do. And then this is my concrete implementation of it. You can say it's an ability handler or an interpreter. And internal to this, I've wrapped the ordered table kind of storage behavior that Unison Cloud gives us. So we have a tasks table. It takes a key of an ID and maps it to a task in storage. And then I've just wrapped the API to be a little more readable to me. So get task by ID, get all, upsert, delete. And then down here is where we actually do our implementation. We pattern match over a computation to say, hey, is someone trying to call upsert? Here's how you actually do it. We talk to the database, we get a result, and then we resume the computation with that result. That's there's a lot to talk about here, but essentially you can think of this as just a concrete implementation of that interface we created. So I'm going to add this. Great. So now we have the ability to save and fetch our tasks. To delete this now. So now let's update our routes to actually use this. I had to do a quick change to our main method to provide that interpreter. So we have, we're providing the ability to call those methods to any of the code that's run in our routes over here. And we specified that with the task CRUD here. So we're saying this needs to run in that context. And then the update I've made is that when you get tasks, we now actually use that getAll function, and then we stick it into the task page, and we return it as a HTML 200. Similarly, we want to be able to create tasks. So we're grabbing the form data, we're pulling a description out of it, we create the new task, we're doing an upsert of it into the database. We're then fetching all of the tasks and returning the task page again. I'm going to update these. And so we can test this. I do want to let you know that I've intentionally put in a very common HTMX bug here, so please don't think less of me for it. So already kind of looks pretty sweet, right? I'm pretty happy with it. But let's add something, and it's a disaster. So that's obviously not what we want it to do. And if you recall, well, if we actually take a look at it, we can see that when we do this post to tasks, doing a post, we're getting 200. The actual response is this entire page, which is not what we were thinking when we built the component, right? Because if we go back to view our task, task form, is that what it was called? It is trying to, it's not trying to replace the page, it's trying to insert the result directly into the to-do. So it's taking the entire page and it's putting it as the first element in our to-do list. That is not what we want. Luckily, this is very easy to fix. We just don't do a fetch all, and this is going to be a task detail instead. And we'll put the new task in here. And we'll update that. Employee stage again. All right, let's who bar, what's after that? Baz. I'm going to also open this up so you can see it. Wow, slides right in. It's got that little fade in. I'm sure someone with better taste than me could make that look cooler, but that's the peak of my UX abilities. And you can see here that now all this changes is just sort of returning that detail. So that's pretty exciting to me. There's my note about fixing it. And then the last bit is that we want delete to work. So let me just go back there and confirm that it doesn't work. We do a delete, you get a 500. We're getting a 500 because view task detail. Because oh no, it's in the routes actually. Sorry about that. In the delete, we just have a to do here, so this just throws an error and explodes. So this is pretty easy to implement now because we already have that CRUD service, so we can just do task CRUD. Even Copilot knows what I want to do. And then the slightly tricky bit here is I want to return a 200 of HTML, but with an empty string. And that's because if we look over here in the detail again, we're replacing itself with the result. And what we want to happen when you delete it is for it to not be rendered anymore. So it's on a 200, it's going to take that empty string, replace itself with it, and just vanish. So let's update that. Run deploy stage. Take a look. All right, I like having the network tab open just so we can see it. We're going to do a delete. See the little spinner was there. We got it done. That's interesting. Oh, because why am I returning done? This is not according to my notes. Interesting. Why did that happen? So this is always the problem with live coding. It's not exciting if something doesn't go slightly wrong. There we go. something snuck in there. I didn't update it correctly. I saved it again. It worked fine. It was returning a paragraph of done. I don't even remember writing that, but it must have been in there. Great. And that's the whole to-do app. It's nice, I think. It's pretty snazzy. There's obviously a million more things you could do with this, but I'm ready to go prod, so I'm just going to do a prod instance of this. Just different URL, doesn't have stage prepended. It's a new version of the application. There we go. So perfect. So that is the live coding. I have this here in case it went well. We did like 7 deploys over the course of that, maybe more. We bootstrapped an entire application. I thought it looked pretty good. It had cool effects and stuff, and you can do all kinds of stuff with Shoelace, like drawers and modals and everything that you would want to use. I have this in case something went wrong, because we don't need to really linger on this. Yeah, and then there's so many more resources. This was very fast. There was a million things happening. I have been working on a much more detailed from scratch PDF of just every step of implementation that even predates the that leads to building the quick start application that we use. So all the decisions behind that and little things that I've kind of tried to take care of for you. Also, just the HTMX website is amazing. They have essays on it because there's a whole bunch of information about truly RESTful hypermedia and hypermedia as the engine of application state, which is a fun thing to say. It makes me feel smart. The Shoelace website just has a bunch of components. There's a link to the actual like documentation on the concept of web components. There's actually a pretty good course on front-end masters, I guess also on YouTube, on doing HTMX with Go, which I think is a great kind of quick get all you need to know about HTMX. Great. And I managed to do this under time, so I guess it's time for questions.